Episode 1, The Birth of a Voice. Washington, August 28, 1963. 250,000 people spread out like a human see in front of the Lincoln Memorial. An African-American man stands before the microphone. His voice resonated with a power that transcends generations. "I have a dream," he says. Those 4 words will change the course of a nation. But who is this man really? What brought him from the segregated streets of the South to become the conscience of America? To understand the dream, we must first know the dreamer. Atlanta, Georgia, January 15, 1929. Michael King Jr. is born in a modest red brick house on Auburn Avenue. His father, Michael King Sr., is a respected Baptist minister. His mother, Alberta Williams King, is a teacher and church organist. The family lives in the heart of Atlanta's black neighborhood, known as Sweet Auburn. Here, African-American families have built their own businesses, schools, and churches, creating an oasis of dignity amidst an ocean of segregation. But even in this refuge, the shadows of racism are long and dark. Jim Crow laws govern every aspect of life. Separate water fountains, separate bathrooms, separate schools, buses where black people must give up their seats to any white person who demands it. This is the America of 1929, a country that promised freedom for all, but only grants it to some. Little Michael is 6 years old when he experiences his first brutal lesson about the color of his skin. He regularly plays with 2 white neighborhood boys, sons of a local store owner. They are inseparable until it's time to start school. One day, his friend's mother forbids him from playing with him again. "You're too old to be playing with colored children," she tells him. Michael runs home with tears in his eyes, unable to understand what he's done wrong. His mother sits with him that afternoon. With patience and pain in her voice, she tells him the story of slavery, of how his ancestors were brought from Africa in chains. She explains the unjust laws, the segregation, the institutionalized hatred. But she ends with a phrase the boy will never forget. "No matter what anyone tells you, you're as good as anyone." That night, something awakens in little Michael, a seed of rebellion against injustice that will grow into a movement. Michael King Sr. is not a man who accepts humiliation. He is a pastor with a commanding presence, a thunderous voice, and a fierce pride in his race. Every Sunday, from the pulpit of Ebenezer Baptist Church, he preaches not only spiritual salvation, but also human dignity. His sermons are laden with references to freedom, justice, and equality promised in Scripture but denied in the streets. Young Michael watches his father from the front row. He sees how words can move people, how they can transform pain into hope, fear into courage. The church isn't just a place of prayer. It's the beating heart of the black community, the only space where they can be fully themselves, where their voices matter. Here, the boy learns the power of public speaking, gospel music, and faith as a weapon of resistance. 1934. The King family travels to Germany. Michael King Sr. attends a Baptist convention in Berlin and takes the opportunity to take his family. During this trip, they visit sites associated with Martin Luther, the Protestant reformer who challenged the world's most powerful church 500 years earlier. King Sr. is deeply impressed by Luther's courage and his willingness to risk everything for his beliefs. Back in Atlanta, he makes a surprising decision. He changes his and his son's name from Michael to Martin Luther. It's a symbolic act laden with meaning. He wants his son to be named after a man who dared to challenge unjust systems. Unwittingly, he is baptizing a man who will become the Martin Luther of racial justice in America. From that moment on, the boy will be known as Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. is an extraordinary student. He reads voraciously, devouring books on history, philosophy, and theology. By the age of 15, he has already skipped 2 grades and is admitted to Morehouse College, a prestigious historically black college in Atlanta. It is 1944, and young Martin enters a world of ideas that will expand his mind and forge his future. At Morehouse, he meets the university's president, Benjamin Mays, a brilliant theologian who becomes his mentor. Mays preaches that religion without social action is empty, that true faith demands fighting injustice. These ideas resonate deeply with young Martin. For the first time, he sees how religion can be a force for social change, not just solace for the soul. Despite his intelligence, Martin struggles internally with his vocation. Part of him wants to be a doctor or a lawyer, something practical. The idea of ministry seems old-fashioned, too emotional, not intellectual enough. He sees preachers who shout and sweat, who move the masses with emotion, but without substance. That's not for him. He wants something more. But Mays's words continue to resonate. Little by little, Martin begins to see ministry differently. It can be a pulpit for social justice. It can be a platform for change. It can combine intellect and faith, philosophy and action. At 18, he finally accepts his calling. He will be a preacher, but he will be a different kind of preacher. 1948. Martin graduates from Morehouse and travels north to Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania. He is one of the few black students at a predominantly white institution. For the first time in his life, he doesn't live under Jim Crow laws. He can sit anywhere he wants on the bus, walk to the front door of any restaurant, use any water fountain. This freedom is intoxicating, but also confusing. Northern racism is different, more subtle, hidden behind polite smiles and admissions policies. There are no whites-only signs, but the stares constantly remind him that he's different. Martin studies intensely, competes fiercely, strives to be the best student. He needs to prove he deserves to be there, that he's as capable as anyone. At Crozer, Martin discovers Mohandas Gandhi. He reads about India's independence struggle, about how a small, frail man defeated the British Empire without firing a shot. The concept of satyagraha, nonviolent resistance based on truth and love, fascinates him deeply. Here is the answer he's been searching for, a way to fight injustice that is both practical and moral, powerful and peaceful. Gandhi taught that love and nonviolence are not signs of weakness, but of extraordinary strength. That real change comes from transforming hearts, not just laws. That the oppressor also needs to be freed from his hatred. These ideas merge in Martin's mind with the Christian teachings of loving one's enemy. He is forging a philosophy that will soon test America's most racist system. 1951. Martin continues his doctoral studies at Boston University. He's a disciplined student, a tireless worker, but he's also young and looking for companionship. A friend tells him about a young singer and music student named Coretta Scott from Alabama. She's beautiful, intelligent, and has an incredible voice, he says. Martin calls her. From their first phone call, there's a connection. They meet for lunch. Coretta is everything he'd been told and more, elegant, cultured, with her own convictions about social justice. She wants to be an opera singer, dreams of international stages. He tells her about his calling to change the South. They have different dreams, but they both share something essential: the desire to live with purpose, to do something meaningful with their lives. June 18, 1953. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott are married in the garden of her parents' home in Marion, Alabama. Martin King Sr. officiates the ceremony. It is a perfect southern summer day, full of hope and promise. Martin is 24, Coretta 26. They have their whole lives ahead of them. But as they celebrate with family and friends, none of them imagine what's to come. In less than 2 years, they'll be at the center of a storm that will shake the nation to its foundations. An incident on a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, will transform this young preacher into the leader of a movement. The question isn't whether they're ready. The question is whether America is ready for them. Episode 2, The Pastor and the Protest. Montgomery, Alabama, September 1954. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta arrive in the state capitol with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Martin has accepted the position of pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, a middle-class black congregation known for its sophistication. At 25, he is the youngest pastor the church has ever had. Montgomery is the former capital of the Confederacy, a city where the slaveholding past never died. It only changed form. Segregation laws are strict and cruel. Black people make up 40% of the population, but live as second-class citizens in their own city. Martin sees all this with fresh eyes. He has studied theory, philosophy, and theology. Now he must live the reality of the segregated South as a leader, not just a victim. December 1st, 1955. Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old seamstress, boards a bus after a long day at a department store. She sits in the designated black section. The bus fills up. A white man remains standing. The driver, James Blake, demands that Rosa and 3 other black passengers give up their seats. The other 3 comply. Rosa remains seated. "Why aren't you moving?" Blake asks. "I don't think you should," Rosa replies calmly. She is arrested, handcuffed, and taken to jail. But Rosa Parks is no ordinary woman. She is the secretary of the local NAACP, a seasoned activist, a student of nonviolent resistance. Her arrest is no accident. It is the moment local activists have been waiting for the launch of a massive boycott. That night, the phone rings at the King's house. It's Edgar Daniel Nixon, leader of the local NAACP. Rosa Parks has been arrested. He says urgently, "We need to organize a boycott. We need to act now." Martin listens intently. He knows this is a crucial moment. Previous boycotts have failed due to a lack of organization and unity. This one must be different. Over the next 48 hours, Montgomery's black community mobilizes with astonishing efficiency. They print and distribute thousands of flyers. They call every church, every barbershop, every beauty salon. The message is clear. On Monday, December 5th, no black person should board Montgomery buses. It's a direct challenge to the system, and everyone knows there will be consequences. December 5th, 1955. Martin and Coretta wake up before dawn. From their window, they watch the street where buses full of black workers normally pass on their way to work. The first bus passes. It's empty. So is the second and the third. Martin feels his heart beat faster. "It's working," he shouts. All over the city, the same miracle is repeated. The buses run, almost empty. Black workers walk for miles in the sun. Some arrive late to work, risking their jobs. Elderly women in their 70s walk with canes, but with their heads held high. "My feet are tired," says one elderly woman, "but my soul is rested." It's more than a boycott. It's a declaration of collective dignity. For the first time in generations, Montgomery's black community acts as one, and that voice says, "No more." That afternoon, Montgomery's black leaders meet to form a Montgomery Improvement Association. They need to elect a president, someone who can speak for everyone, who has the education to negotiate with whites, but the authenticity to inspire black people. Eyes turn to Martin Luther King Jr. He's young, new to the city, with no enemies or complicated political alliances. Almost by default, he's elected president. Martin accepts with a mixture of honor and terror. He's only 26 years old. He's been in Montgomery for barely 15 months. He wasn't looking to be the leader of a movement. He just wanted to be a good pastor. But the moment has chosen him, not the other way around. That night, he must give his first speech as leader of the boycott. He has 20 minutes to prepare, to find the words that will unite a community and define a movement. The Holt Street Baptist Church is packed. 5,000 people are crowded inside and around the building. Martin steps up to the pulpit. His hands are shaking slightly. He takes a deep breath and begins. His voice is clear, strong, full of conviction. He speaks of Rosa Parks, of her dignity, of her courage. He speaks of tiredness, not only physical but spiritual, of being tired of being treated as less than human. Then he raises his tone. "There are times when people get tired," he says, and the crowd responds with a roar. "Protest is a right." "Amen," the crowd shouts. But then Martin does something crucial. He invokes nonviolence. "Our actions must be guided by love," he declares. "We must not seek revenge. Love must be our regulating force." He fuses the Christian gospel with Gandhian philosophy, creating a moral framework for resistance. It is a 16-minute speech that becomes a manifesto of the civil rights movement. The boycott, which was supposed to last a day, stretched into weeks, then months. The black community organized a sophisticated carpool system. Black car owners became volunteer drivers. Churches bought vehicles. Some liberal whites secretly joined. The city responded with repression, arresting drivers for trumped-up violations, raising insurance rates, and threatening to revoke licenses. Martin becomes the face of the boycott. He gives interviews, travels to raise funds, and negotiates with city officials. But He also leads by example. He walks when he can, drives when necessary, visits the weary, and encourages the discouraged. The pressure is immense. He receives hate mail daily and death-threatening phone calls all hours. His family lives in constant fear. But he can't stop. Too many people depend on him. January 30th, 1956. Martin is in a meeting when he receives an urgent call. "Your house has been bombed," he is told. He runs back. He sees the angry crowd, the police, the smoke pouring from his porch. He runs inside. Coretta and her newborn daughter, Yolanda, are fine. They were in the back of the house when the bomb exploded. But everything could have been different. Martin steps onto the porch. The black crowd that has gathered is furious, armed with sticks, rocks, some with guns. They are ready for violence, thirsty for revenge. This is the moment of truth. If Martin loses control of the crowd, there will be blood in the streets that night. He raises his hands. "Listen to me," he says in a firm voice. "You must go home in peace. We cannot solve this problem of violence. We must love our enemies." It is an extraordinary act of leadership, calming an angry mob minutes after they try to kill his family. November 13th, 1956. After 381 days of boycott, the news everyone had been waiting for arrived. The United States Supreme Court declared bus segregation laws unconstitutional. It was a complete, total, undeniable victory. That night, the black churches of Montgomery celebrated with songs and tears of joy. They had won. A group of people without political power, without weapons, without significant money, had defeated the most powerful system in the South. December 21st, 1956. Martin Luther King Jr. boards a Montgomery bus for the first time in over a year. He sits in the front, where the law previously prohibited him. It's not just a seat. It's a symbol of restored dignity. The Montgomery boycott becomes a model for future protests. And Martin Luther King Jr. emerges as the undisputed leader of the civil rights movement. But victory comes at a cost. Martin is physically and emotionally exhausted. He has received 30 death threats in the last month. His home has been under constant surveillance. Coretta lives in perpetual fear. Her church in Dexter needs attention. She can't give it. And now, with the victory, expectations multiply. The entire Black South is looking to him, hoping he'll replicate the success in their own cities. In January 1957, Martin helped found the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization dedicated to coordinating civil rights efforts across the South. He became its president. He was no longer just the pastor of a church in Montgomery. He was the leader of a movement that was shaking the foundations of America. And the real challenge was just beginning. May 13, 1957. Martin travels to Washington to participate in the Pilgrimage of Prayer for Freedom. In front of 27,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial, he gives a speech on voting rights. His voice rings with power. Give us the vote. It is his debut on the national stage, the first glimpse of what is to come. But as he speaks, FBI agents in the audience take notes. J. Edgar Hoover, the powerful director of the FBI, has noticed this young preacher. He considers him a danger, possibly a communist, definitely an agitator. Hoover orders surveillance. From that day on, Martin Luther King Jr. lives under constant government scrutiny. His phone is tapped, his mail read, his movements tracked. The man who preaches love is being hunted by his own country. The question is, can he survive what's coming? Episode 3, March into the Storm. Birmingham, Alabama, April 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. looks out his hotel room window at the city many call the Johannesburg of America. Birmingham is the most violently segregated city in the South. Its Commissioner of Public Safety, Bull Connor, is a rabid segregationist who makes no secret of his hatred. Bombings of black homes and businesses are so frequent that one neighborhood is known as Dynamite Hill. Martin knows that Birmingham will be his toughest test. The civil rights movement needs a dramatic victory that captures national attention. Local protests have been courageous but fragmented. Martin and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference are coming to organize a massive campaign of nonviolent resistance. They call it Project C for confrontation. The goal is simple but risky. fill Birmingham's jails with protesters until the city has no choice but to negotiate. Martin and his team train hundreds of volunteers in nonviolent resistance techniques. In churches at night, they practice scenarios. They'll spit on you, Martin tells them. They'll hit you. They'll call you the vilest names. And you can't respond with violence. They train them to fall to the ground, protecting their heads, to not hit back, to sing hymns while being arrested. Not everyone understands this philosophy. Many young black men want to fight back, returning blow for blow. Why should we be peaceful when they're violent? They ask. Martin answers patiently. Because violence only breeds more violence. Our strength lies in our morality. We must expose their brutality without becoming brutes ourselves. The world is watching. We must win their hearts, not just this battle. April 3rd, 1963. The marches begin. Small groups of protesters walk peacefully toward the city center. They are immediately arrested. The next day, more marches, more arrests. The strategy is one of attrition. Fill the jails, exhaust police resources, force a crisis. The national media begins to pay attention. Birmingham becomes the center of a battle for the soul of America. But Bull Connor responds with the full force of his authority. He orders mass arrests. The prisons fill up. He begins using high-pressure hoses against the protesters. The water comes out with such force that it tears the bark off trees, throws people against walls, and breaks bones. He uses police dogs that bite and tear. The images are brutal, shocking, impossible to ignore. April 12, 1963. Martin Luther King Jr. is arrested for violating a court order prohibiting demonstrations. It's his 13th time in prison, but this one is different. He's placed in solitary confinement, a small, dark cell with no mattress or sheets. He's completely isolated. It's a tactic to break his spirit. In his cell, Martin reads a newspaper article in which 8 moderate white clergymen criticize the demonstrations as reckless and extreme. These are not rabid segregationists, but pastors and rabbis who consider themselves allies. But they ask him to be patient, to wait, and not to cause trouble. Martin feels a righteous fury. With a smuggled pencil in the margins of the newspaper and on scraps of toilet paper, he begins to write. Dear fellow clergy, Martin begins. His pen moves with urgency. I rarely pause to respond to criticisms of my work, but you are men of goodwill. And then, with an eloquence that combines personal pain, social analysis, and moral prophecy, Martin explains why they cannot wait any longer. For 340 years we have waited, she writes. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the sting of segregation to say, wait. She describes the agony of explaining to her 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park, the tears when she tells her Funtown is closed to children of color, when you constantly have to invent an answer for your 5-year-old asking, why do white people treat colored people so badly? Then you will understand why it is difficult to wait. The letter becomes one of the most important documents in the history of civil rights. It defines injustice, advocates civil disobedience, and articulates the moral urgency of the movement. But sitting in his cold cell, Martin doesn't know if anyone will read his words. Early May 1963. The movement faces a crisis. Arrests have depleted the number of adults willing to march. Many are afraid of losing their jobs, going to jail, and retaliation. Martin and his team make a controversial decision that divides opinion. Recruiting children and teenagers. The Children's Crusade begins on May 2nd. More than 1,000 black students, some as young as 6, skip school and march toward downtown Birmingham, singing hymns. The police arrest them en masse. The next day, more than 1,000 more children join. Bull Connor orders the use of water hoses and police dogs. The images are devastating. Children thrown by the water pressure, teenagers bitten by dogs, teachers beaten with police batons. Photographs of Birmingham appear on newspaper covers around the world. One image in particular becomes iconic. A black teenager is attacked by a police dog as white officers look on. America can't look away. It can't deny the brutality. It can't pretend segregation is peaceful or benevolent. Birmingham exposes the violence inherent in institutional racism. President John F. Kennedy, who had been cautious about civil rights, viewed the images with horror. "They sicken me," he said. International pressure mounted. American diplomats struggled to defend American democracy as images from Birmingham contradicted every word. Martin had achieved what he sought: to make the world bear witness, to make the injustice impossible to ignore. May 10, 1963. After weeks of protests, arrests, and violence, Birmingham business leaders meet with Martin and his team. They agree to desegregate downtown stores, create jobs for black people, and release arrested protesters. It's a victory, but an incomplete one. Bull Connor refuses to accept the agreement. That night, the Gaston Motel where Martin is staying is bombed. So is Martin's brother's house. Tensions explode. Black people in Birmingham, frustrated by the continued violence, respond with riots. They burn cars, smash windows, and clash with the police. Martin walks the streets pleading for calm, trying to restore nonviolence. It's a painful reminder. His hold on the movement is fragile. The black community's anger is justified, but if it explodes into indiscriminate violence, all the gains will be lost. June 11, 1963. President John F. Kennedy appears on national television to address the nation on civil rights. It is a historic moment. For the first time, an American president declares that segregation is morally wrong, not just legally questionable. "We face a moral crisis," Kennedy says. "It is as old as the scriptures and as clear as the American Constitution." Kennedy announces that he will send comprehensive civil rights legislation to Congress. It is a monumental victory for Martin and the movement. Birmingham worked. Nonviolent confrontation forced the federal government to act. But that same night, hours after Kennedy's speech, Medgar Evers, leader of the NAACP in Mississippi, is shot and killed in front of his home. Victory and tragedy dance together, inseparable. Summer of 1963. Martin and other civil rights leaders plan something bold: a massive march on Washington. They will call it the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. The goal is to demonstrate popular support for Kennedy's proposed civil rights legislation and to push for jobs and economic equality. Not everyone supports the idea. President Kennedy fears that a large march could turn violent and damage his legislative efforts. Some more radical black leaders criticize the march as too moderate, too willing to compromise with the white establishment. But Martin persists. He knows they need a moment that captures the national imagination, that showcases the dignity and determination of the movement. The organizers expect perhaps 100,000 participants. Martin begins working on his speech for that day. He writes drafts, revises them, searches for the perfect words. He doesn't know he's about to give the most famous speech of his life, one that will define not only his legacy, but the aspirations of a nation. September 15, 1963. 2 weeks after the March on Washington, a bomb explodes at the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. 4 black girls are killed instantly: Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Carol Denise McNair. They are in Sunday school, wearing their best church clothes. The bomb destroys them. Martin travels to Birmingham for the funeral. He is devastated. He looks at the 4 small coffins and wonders if his strategy of nonviolence really works. The children paid with their lives. Is it worth it? How much more blood must be shed? But when he preaches at the funeral, his voice trembles with renewed determination. "These girls did not die in vain," he says. "God still has a way of bringing good out of evil." The Birmingham girls join a growing list of martyrs. And Martin Luther King Jr. knows he could be next. Every day he receives threats. Every trip could be his last. But he can't stop. Not now. Not when they're so close to changing everything. The question that haunts him on dark nights is simple and terrifying. Will he live to see the dream come true? Episode 4. The Dream and Its Shadows. August 28, 1963. Washington, District of Columbia. The sun is barely beginning to rise over National Mall when the first buses arrive. They come from New York, Chicago, Detroit, Los Angeles. Some traveled all night. Workers, teachers, students, ministers, housewives. Black and white, young and old, all converge on a Lincoln Memorial with one common purpose: to demand justice. Martin Luther King Jr. wakes up early in the Willard Hotel. He barely slept. That night, he reviewed his speech for the last time. It's a carefully crafted text, full of biblical references and political rhetoric. But something worries him. He feels it lacks heart, passion, the fire that ignites spirits. However, there is no more time. In a few hours, he will stand before the nation, before the world. By mid-morning, the National Mall is transformed. 250,000 people fill every available space. It's the largest civil rights rally in American history. Television cameras capture the magnitude of the moment. America has never seen anything like it. A peaceful, diverse mass movement filled with dignity and purpose. The organizers are astonished. They feared violence, expected provocateurs, prepared for disaster. But what they get is order, brotherhood, hope. The crowd sings freedom anthems. Folk groups play guitars. Joan Baez sings We Shall Overcome. Bob Dylan brings his raspy, prophetic voice. It's more than a protest. It's a celebration of possibility, a demonstration that change is inevitable when people come together. Martin waits backstage with other leaders. Mahalia Jackson, the queen of gospel, is nearby. She will sing before his speech. Each speaker has a limited time. There are many who want to speak. Martin will be the last, the icing on the cake. The pressure is immense. Hundreds of thousands in front of him, millions watching on television. A divided nation waiting to hear what this 34-year-old preacher has to say. He takes out his prepared speech. He reads the lines again. They're good, solid, but something's still missing. Clarence Jones, one of his advisors, approaches. Just be yourself, he tells him. Speak from the heart. Mahalia Jackson listens and nods. She knows the power of speaking from a place deeper than logic, from the place where the soul lives. It's mid-afternoon when Martin Luther King Jr. walks to the podium. The crowd roars. He gazes toward the human horizon stretching to the Washington Monument. He places a prepared speech on the lectern. He adjusts the microphones. He takes a deep breath, and he begins. 5 decades ago, a great American, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation, he says. His voice is measured, controlled. He speaks about the unfulfilled promise of America, about how 100 years after emancipation, black people are still not free. He reads a prepared text, paragraph after paragraph. It's a good speech, powerful even, but it's not the speech that will be remembered. Martin reaches the end of his prepared line. The crowd applauds, but not with the intensity he had hoped for. From behind the stage, Mahalia Jackson shouts, "Tell them about the dream, Martin. Tell them about the dream." She recalls a sermon Martin gave in Detroit weeks earlier, where he spoke about his dream for America. It was electrifying, authentic, straight from the heart. Martin hears her voice. In a spontaneous decision that will change history, he sets aside his prepared speech. He pushes it to the side of the lectern, and he begins to improvise. So even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream, he says. The crowd senses a shift. Something different is happening. It's a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream, Martin repeats, his voice now ringing with power, that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. The crowd begins to shout. They sense something historic is happening. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. Each sentence builds on the previous one, each image more powerful, more poignant. Martin is in a state of prophetic flux, channeling not only his personal vision, but the collective aspiration of millions. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Tears stream down faces in the crowd. Black and white alike weep together. This isn't just a political speech. It's a sermon, a prayer, a vision of national redemption. Martin reaches crescendo. When we let freedom ring. His voice is now a thunder of hope. When we let it ring from every town and every village, from every state and every city, We will be able to hasten that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last. Free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. The ensuing silence lasts barely a second before the roar of the crowd shakes the National Mall. 250,000 people are on their feet, weeping, shouting, applauding. Martin has captured something ineffable, the hope of a nation searching for its best. He has given voice to a dream that transcends race, religion, region. For 16 minutes, he showed America not as it is, but as it could be. But even as a nation celebrates Martin's speech, the forces of resistance are mobilizing. At FBI headquarters, J. Edgar Hoover watches a televised broadcast with growing disgust. King is the most dangerous Negro in America, he tells his aides. He orders intensified surveillance. He wants to find something, anything, to destroy King's reputation. In the South, segregationists swear they will never allow King's dream to come true. Governors promise to resist any federal civil rights law. The Ku Klux Klan holds meetings and plans reprisals. 18 days after the march, the bomb explodes in the Birmingham church, killing the 4 girls. The dream and the nightmare exist simultaneously. October 1964. Martin Luther King Jr. receives a call that will change his life. He has won the Nobel Peace Prize. At 35, he is the youngest recipient in the award's history. It is a global recognition of his leadership, his commitment to nonviolence, and his moral vision. He travels to Oslo, Norway, for the ceremony. It is December, and the city is covered in snow. When he accepts the award, Martin dedicates the honor not to himself but to the movement. I accept this award on behalf of a civil rights movement that is moving with determination and nonviolent majesty toward the goal of justice for all. He donates the entire prize money, $154,000, to civil rights organizations. But not everyone celebrates. Younger, more radical black leaders begin to question Martin's strategy of nonviolence. Malcolm X, the charismatic leader of the Nation of Islam, criticizes Martin as too moderate, too willing to compromise with whites. You can't fight hate with love, Malcolm argues. You need to fight fire with fire. Martin respects Malcolm, but disagrees. Violence perpetuates hate. Hate perpetuates violence in a downward cycle of destruction, he responds. But privately, Martin understands the frustration. Progress is painfully slow. Promises are constantly broken. How much longer can he ask for patience from a community that has waited 300 years? Tensions within the movement are growing. February 21st, 1965. Malcolm X is assassinated at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. Martin is devastated. Although they differed in strategy, they shared the same goal: freedom for their people. Coretta attends the funeral in his place. Martin receives death threats if he goes. He watches the television news, Malcolm's coffin, and the tears of his widow Betty. That night, Martin can't sleep. He paces his home in Atlanta, thinking about mortality, about the cost of leadership. Malcolm was 39, just a few years older than he is. If Malcolm can be assassinated in a room full of his followers, what protects him? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Martin knows he's living on borrowed time. The question isn't if he'll be killed, but when. He needs to work faster, accomplish more. Time is running out, and there is so much to do. His next battle will be in a city called Selma, and it will be his most dangerous yet. Episode 5, The Bridge of Blood. January 1965. Selma is a small town in the heart of Alabama, but it represents a gigantic problem: the systematic suppression of the black vote. Although black people make up more than half of the county's population, less than 2% are registered to vote. Local authorities use impossible literacy tests, poll taxes, and violence to keep black people away from the polls. Martin Luther King Jr. arrives in Selma with a clear objective: to force a crisis that will compel the federal government to protect voting rights. He has learned from Birmingham that dramatic confrontation captures national attention and generates legislative change. Selma, with its racist Sheriff Jim Clark and its culture of intimidation, is the perfect setting for this confrontation. Martin and local activists organize daily marches to the courthouse to register voters. Each day, Lines of well-dressed black people march in order toward the building. Every day, Sheriff Clark and his deputies turn them away, sometimes violently. They beat them with batons, push them, and arrest them on trumped-up charges. Cameras capture everything. February 18, 1965. During a night march in the nearby town of Marion, state police brutally attacked the protesters. A young man named Jimmy Lee Jackson, 26, tries to protect his mother and grandmother from a police officer's beating. The officer shoots him in the stomach. Jimmy dies 8 days later. He is another martyr in a list that grows all too quickly. The death of Jimmy Lee Jackson demands a response. Local leaders propose a bold march, walking 80 kilometers from Selma to the state capitol in Montgomery to present their grievances to Governor George Wallace. It's dangerous, possibly suicidal. They will have to cross hostile territory, rural roads where the Klan operates freely. But the symbolism is powerful, taking their protest directly to the doors of state power. March 7, 1963. 600 marchers gather at Brown Chapel Methodist Church. Martin is not with them. He has returned to Atlanta to preach at his church. John Lewis, a 25-year-old leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Hosea Williams of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference lead the march. The marchers sing hymns as they walk toward the Edmund Pettus Bridge. The Edmund Pettus Bridge arches over the Alabama River. As the marchers reach the top and begin their descent, they see what awaits them, a wall of state troopers wearing helmets, gas masks, and wielding batons. Behind them, deputies on horseback. On the side of the road, white spectators with Confederate flags shouting insults. "You have 2 minutes to disperse," the state police commander announces through a megaphone. The protesters kneel to pray. Not even 30 seconds have passed when the police attack. They use batons, bash heads, break arms. They fire tear gas directly into the crowd. Deputies on horseback charge, trampling people lying on the ground. It's a scene of war, not a peaceful protest. John Lewis suffers a skull fracture. Dozens more are hospitalized. Protesters flee back toward the church, bleeding, crying, traumatized. ABC News cameras capture every second. That night, the network interrupts its special film to show images from the bridge. 50 million Americans watch the brutality in real time. The day will be known as Bloody Sunday. Images of Bloody Sunday shake the national conscience. In cities across the country, spontaneous demonstrations of solidarity fill the streets. White liberal students and clergy are horrified. President Lyndon B. Johnson faces massive pressure to act. Martin Luther King Jr. issues an urgent appeal. He asks clergy of all faiths to come to Selma for a second march. March 9th, more than 2,000 people gather, including hundreds of white ministers, rabbis, and priests who flew in from all over the country. Martin leads this march. Again, they reach the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Again, they encounter a wall of police. But this time, Martin makes a controversial decision. He kneels, prays, and then turns around. He doesn't cross the bridge. Martin's decision to turn back infuriates many young activists. They accuse him of cowardice, of caving in to government pressure. Martin explains that a federal judge ordered them not to march, and that violating that order could destroy their legal case. But the explanation doesn't satisfy everyone. The rift between Martin and the more radical activists deepens. That night, 3 white ministers who had come for the march walked through the streets of Selma. A group of segregationists attacked them with metal pipes. They brutally beat James Reeb, a Unitarian minister from Boston. Reeb died 2 days later. His death, that of a white man from the North, generated more national outrage than the death of Jimmy Lee Jackson. It is a painful truth. A white life is worth more than a black life, even in the civil rights movement. March 15, 1965. President Lyndon B. Johnson appears before a joint session of Congress to present his proposed Voting Rights Act. It is an extraordinary speech, one of the defining moments of his presidency. In a deep, determined voice, Johnson declares, "There shall not be a black American nor a white American, but only Americans." Then, in a moment that paralyzes Martin as he watches on television, Johnson says, "Their cause must be our cause as well, for it is not just black people, but truly all of us, who must overcome the crippling legacy of intolerance and injustice. And we shall win. Johnson has adopted the anthem of the civil rights movement. Martin, sitting in his living room, weeps. For the first time, a Southern president has fully sided with civil rights. March 21st, 1965. Finally, with federal protection, the march from Selma to Montgomery officially begins. 3,200 marchers cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge under the Alabama sun. This time, there is no violence. Federal troops protect them. Helicopters fly overhead. The United States government has finally decided to protect its black citizens. 4 or 5 days, they walk along rural roads. Their numbers wax and wane. Only 300 are allowed to march on the two-lane sections by law, but thousands join in on the wider stretches. They sleep in fields, eat donated food, and sing to keep their spirits up. It is a pilgrimage, a testament to perseverance. Every kilometer is an affirmation of humanity, a claim to the right to participate in democracy. March 25th, 1965. The marchers arrive in Montgomery. Their number has grown to 25,000. They gather in front of the Alabama State Capitol, the same building where Jefferson Davis was inaugurated as President of the Confederacy. Martin Luther King Jr. speaks from a temporary podium, his voice resonating with prophetic power. How long? Not long, he cries, because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long, because truth crushed to the ground will rise again. The crowd roars. They've walked, bled, some have died. But they are here in the heart of the old Confederacy, demanding their rights. It is a monumental moral victory. But victory comes at an immediate price. That night, Viola Liuzzo, a white housewife from Detroit who came to help with the marchers' transportation, is shot and killed by Ku Klux Klan members while driving along an Alabama highway. It's another death, another reminder that progress is paid for in blood. August 6, 1965. President Johnson signs the Voting Rights Act in a ceremony at the Capitol. Martin Luther King Jr. is present, one of the honored guests. The law bans discriminatory literacy tests and provides federal oversight of voter registration in states with a history of discrimination. It is a massive legislative victory, the culmination of years of sacrifice. But even as he celebrates, Martin knows the battle is far from over. The right to vote is crucial, but it's not enough. Black people still live in poverty, face discrimination in housing and employment, and endure police brutality. And the movement itself is fracturing. Young leaders embrace black power and reject nonviolence. The Vietnam War escalates, and Martin faces an agonizing choice. Should he speak out against the war and risk alienating President Johnson? August 11, 1965. Just 5 days after the signing of the Voting Rights Act, the black neighborhood of what's in Los Angeles erupts in riots. For 6 days, violence rages. 34 people die, and more than 1,000 are injured. Northern black people, frustrated by poverty and police brutality, find no hope in the right to vote. They want economic justice, respect, and real opportunity. Martin flies to Los Angeles and walks through the destroyed streets. Young people shout at him, "We won because we burned, baby." Martin is devastated. His philosophy of nonviolence is losing ground. The movement he built is evolving beyond his control. The question that haunts him is simple and terrifying. Can he keep the movement together when patience runs out and righteous anger seeks an outlet? The path ahead is darker than he ever imagined. Episode 6. Dream Confronts Nightmare. January 1966. Martin Luther King Jr. makes a bold decision to bring the civil rights movement north. Chicago becomes his target. The Windy City is deeply segregated, not because of Jim Crow laws, but because of discriminatory practices in housing, employment, and education. Black people live in crowded ghettos, while whites enjoy prosperous neighborhoods. Martin rents an apartment on Chicago's west side to experience ghetto life firsthand. The apartment at 1550 South Hamlin Avenue is depressing. Cracked walls, inadequate heat, cockroaches, rats. "I never imagined conditions would be this bad," Martin tells Coretta. "Now I see what people face every day." He launches a Chicago campaign, focusing on fair housing and decent jobs. But Chicago will be unlike anything he's faced. Richard J. Daley, The powerful mayor of Chicago is different from the Southern segregationists. He doesn't use overtly racist language. He doesn't support the Ku Klux Klan. He's a Democrat who publicly supported civil rights. But he governs a deeply segregated city and has no intention of changing that. Daley is a master of political maneuvering. He promises to cooperate with Martin, but secretly sabotages every initiative. Martin organizes marches through white neighborhoods to expose housing discrimination. But what he finds shocks and horrifies him. In the South, he faced police dogs and water hoses. In Chicago, he faces white mobs throwing rocks, bottles, and death threats. White residents line the streets shouting obscenities, holding signs that read, "Black people, go back to Africa." Martin is hit in the head with a rock. Afterward, he says, "I've been to many demonstrations in the South, but I've never seen anything as hostile and hateful as what I've seen here in Chicago." While Martin fights in Chicago, the civil rights movement is undergoing a painful transformation. Stokely Carmichael, the new leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, rejects nonviolence and embraces the concept of Black Power. In June 1966, during a march in Mississippi, Carmichael shouts, "What we need is Black Power." The crowd roars its approval. Martin is present and deeply uneasy. Black Power means different things to different people, but for many, it means armed self-defense and racial separation. It is antithetical to everything Martin has preached. That night, in a tense meeting, Martin and Carmichael debate. Violence is impractical and immoral, Martin argues. Love is the only answer. Carmichael responds, "Love doesn't feed anyone. Power does." The generational and philosophical gap becomes a chasm. Vietnam becomes a crisis of conscience for Martin. The war escalates every month. Thousands of young Americans, disproportionately black and poor, are dying in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Martin sees a hypocrisy. America preaches democracy while bombing Vietnamese villages, spending billions on war while its own citizens live in poverty. His advisors implore him to remain silent. "You're alienating President Johnson," they warn. "We need your support for civil rights. Don't mix the two causes." But Martin cannot separate domestic from international justice. He sees the connection. Militarism, racism, and poverty are interconnected evils. The government that oppresses black people at home oppresses Vietnamese people abroad. He must speak out, no matter the political cost. April 4th, 1967. Riverside Church in New York City is packed. Martin Luther King Jr. takes the pulpit to give one of the most controversial speeches of his life. Beyond Vietnam, a time to break the silence. His voice trembles with moral conviction as he denounces the war as the enemy of the poor and calls the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on social uplift programs is approaching spiritual death, he declares. He calls for an immediate end to the bombing, troop withdrawal, and reparations to Vietnam. It is a frontal attack on American foreign policy. The reaction is immediate and ferocious. The newspapers denounce him. The Washington Post accuses him of betraying his cause. The NAACP publicly distances itself from him. Even close allies feel betrayed. President Johnson, furious, cuts off all communication with Martin. Donors withdraw. Contributions to the movement plummet. Martin has sacrificed his political influence for his principles. He is more isolated than ever. August 1966. After months of marches, negotiations, and conflict, the Chicago campaign ends with a weak agreement. The city promises to make efforts to improve housing and combat discrimination. These are vague promises, with no real enforcement mechanisms. Martin knows it's a defeat disguised as a victory. He has exposed Northern racism, but not defeated it. Chicago showed me that there are deeper problems in segregation laws, Martin reflects. Northern racism is systemic, economic, psychological. There's no Sheriff Bull Connor to dramatize the evil. It's subtle, diffuse, but just as destructive. He returns to the South physically and emotionally exhausted. Chicago has demonstrated the limits of his strategy. It needs something new, something more radical. Martin Luther King Jr. is evolving. The moderate who once spoke of dreams now speaks of economic redistribution, democratic socialism, and the fundamental restructuring of American society. He reads Marx, not to embrace communism, but to understand the dynamics of capitalism. He concludes that racism, poverty, and militarism are inseparable products of the same system. The real problem is that the United States is a socialist country for the rich and ruthless capitalism for the poor, he says in a speech. He proposes an economic bill of rights, guaranteed jobs, and a universal minimum income. These are radical ideas that frighten even his liberal allies. But Martin believes the time has come to move beyond civil rights to human rights, beyond integration to real economic justice. December 1967. Martin announces his most ambitious project yet, the Poor People's Campaign. The plan is to bring thousands of poor people of all races to Washington, establish a resurrection city on the National Mall, and remain there until Congress passes radical economic legislation. It will be a nonviolent but militant confrontation with federal power itself. We're going to Washington to demand that the government do something about unemployment, inadequate housing, and inferior education, he declares. We're going to demand our checks. It's bold, risky, possibly impossible. It will require organizing Black, white, Latino, and Native Americans, all united under the banner of poverty. Many consider it the last desperate act of a leader whose time has passed. Meanwhile, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI intensify their secret war against Martin. They have his telephone tapped, his hotel rooms monitored, his movements tracked. The FBI has recorded private conversations that reveal Martin's marital infidelities. They send the tapes to Coretta, attempting to destroy her marriage. They send anonymous letters to Martin urging him to commit suicide. King, there's only one thing left for you to do. You know what it is. Reads an FBI letter disguised as coming from a disaffected black man. You have only 34 days. You're done. It's a campaign of psychological harassment designed to break Martin. Hoover sees him not as a pacifist minister, but as an existential threat to the American order, and the FBI has almost unlimited resources to destroy him. Martin Luther King Jr. is exhausted in ways that go beyond the physical. At 38, he looks 60. Years of constant travel, death threats, and relentless pressure have taken their toll. He suffers from insomnia, depression, and deep self-doubt. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it, he confides to close friends. I see the hatred, the division, the violence. Did I really change anything? But he can't stop. Too many people depend on him. The poor need an advocate. The movement needs a moral leader. Though his body craves rest, his spirit cannot give in. If I were to die tomorrow, he tells Coretta one night, I want people to say I tried to love someone, that I tried to serve humanity. He doesn't know how soon those words will be fulfilled. March 1968. Martin receives a call from Memphis, Tennessee. Sanitation workers, almost all of them black, are on strike for fair wages and decent working conditions. They have been marching for weeks. They ask Martin to come support them, to lend his voice to their cause. It is exactly the kind of economic struggle Martin now embraces. I'll go to Memphis, he decides. He doesn't know he's making the decision that will end his life. He doesn't know that Memphis will be the place where the dream ends and the legend begins. He doesn't know that the forces that have hunted him for years will finally catch up with him there. All he knows is that the working poor need help, and he's never been able to refuse that call. He packs his suitcase for a journey from which there's no return. Episode 7. Memphis and the End of the Road. Memphis, Tennessee, March 1968. The city on the Mississippi River is tense, divided, on the verge of violence. 1,300 sanitation workers, nearly all black men, have been on strike for over a month. Their demand is simple but profound. Recognition of their union, fair wages, and the basic right to human dignity. They carry signs declaring, I am a man, an affirmation of humanity in a system that treats them as disposable. The strike began after two workers, Etchall Cole and Robert Walker, were crushed to death by a faulty garbage truck. The city refused to adequately compensate their families. It was a final straw after years of miserable wages, abusive supervisors, and dangerous conditions. The workers said, enough is enough. Memphis Mayor Henry Loeb, a stubborn segregationist, refused to negotiate. March 18, 1968. Martin Luther King Jr. arrives in Memphis to support the workers. He speaks to a crowd of 15,000 at the Masonic Temple. "All of you are showing that we can stay together," he says in a powerful voice. "And we must stay together. We are tired. We are tired of working and not receiving living wages." The crowd roars its approval. Martin feels the energy, the passion. He promises to return to lead a massive march. March 28th. Martin returns for the promised march. But from the start, something is wrong. Groups of radical black youth, frustrated with the nonviolence, plan to use the march for other purposes. As Martin leads thousands through the streets of Memphis, some youths begin smashing store windows. Violence erupts. The police respond with brutality, firing tear gas and beating protesters. A black teenager, Larry Payne, is shot and killed by an officer. Martin is devastated. For the first time, a march he led ended in violence. The newspapers blame him. King sparks riots. The headlines scream. His critics, both white and black, point to this as evidence that he has lost control, that his time has passed. Martin faces an existential crisis. "Maybe I can't lead nonviolent marches anymore," he tells his advisors. Maybe the era of nonviolence is over. But his closest associates encourage him. "You can't let a small group of rioters destroy what you built," Ralph Abernathy, his closest friend, tells him. "You must return to Memphis. You must prove that nonviolence still works." Martin knows they are right. If he flees Memphis, he confirms all the criticisms. He must return. He must lead another march. He must demonstrate that nonviolence is more than an ideal. It is a practical strategy for change. April 3rd, 1968. Martin returns to Memphis, this time with his brother A.D. King and Ralph Abernathy. They stay at the Lorraine Motel, a modest establishment in the heart of Memphis's black community. The motel will be his base while he plans the next march. But Martin is restless, worried. The death threats have increased in frequency and intensity. That morning, Martin's flight to Memphis faces delay. They receive a bomb threat. The plane must be searched before takeoff. Once in Memphis, the FBI informs him that there are specific threats against his life. He is assigned additional police protection, but Martin knows that no amount of security can protect him if someone really wants to kill him. "I've stopped worrying about my personal safety," he tells a friend. "If they're going to kill me, they'll do it no matter what I do." April 3rd, night. The weather in Memphis is terrible. It's raining torrentially, thunder and lightning light up the sky. Martin is exhausted and doesn't want to go to the scheduled meeting at the Masonic Temple. He sends Ralph Abernathy in his place. But Ralph calls him from the church. "There are 2,000 people here who want to hear you," he says. "You must come." Martin sighs, puts on his coat, and walks out into the rain. The Masonic Temple is filled with sanitation workers and their families, activists, and ministers. When Martin enters, the crowd rises in applause. He steps up to the rain-soaked pulpit. He begins to speak, but there's something different about his tone, something prophetic and final. He talks about death threats, about not being afraid. "Like anyone, I'd like to live a long life," he says. "Longevity has its place, but that doesn't concern me right now." Martin continues, his voice gaining power, his presence filling the space. He speaks of all human history, of how if God allowed him to choose when to live, he would choose this precise moment. "Only when it's dark enough can you see the stars," he says. He speaks of the sanitation workers, of their dignity, of their just struggle. He promises to be with them no matter what. Then, in what will be remembered as one of the most chilling moments in American history, Martin looks ahead to the future he won't see. "I don't know what will happen now," he says, his voice trembling with emotion. "We have difficult days ahead of us. But it really doesn't matter to me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. And I don't care. Like anyone, I'd like to live a long life. But I'm not worried about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up on the mountain. And I've looked out and seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." Tears stream down his face. The crowd weeps with him. It's as if he knows, as if he can see beyond the veil. "So I am happy tonight. I am not afraid. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He collapses in Ralph Abernathy's arms, emotionally exhausted. The crowd is on its feet, weeping, singing. Unbeknownst to them, Martin Luther King Jr. has just given his last speech. April 4th, 1968. Martin wakes up late in the morning. The day is beautiful, sunny, and warm, a marked contrast to the storm the night before. He spends a day in meetings, planning the upcoming march, talking with lawyers about legal strategies. He is in a good mood, relaxed. He jokes with his brother and Ralph Abernathy. In the afternoon, he prepares to go to dinner at the home of Billy Kyles, a local minister. It will be a traditional Southern soul food dinner. Martin is excited. He loves good food and company. He dresses carefully, putting on a white shirt and tie. Around 6 in the evening, he leaves his room on the second floor of the Lorraine Motel and walks to the railing overlooking the parking lot. 6 minutes past 6 in the afternoon, Martin stands on the balcony of room 206. Down below in the parking lot are his driver and several colleagues. Be sure to play Precious Lord, Take My Hand at the meeting tonight. Martin shouts to musician Ben Branch. Play it beautifully. They are casual, everyday words with no special weight. Just a man making plans for the evening. 183 meters away, in a dilapidated boarding house, a man kneels in the bathtub of a shared bathroom. James Earl Ray, a convicted racist who escaped from prison a year earlier, peers through the scope of a Remington Game Master rifle. He's been following Martin for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Now he has it. Martin is motionless, vulnerable, perfectly framed. Ray exhales and pulls the trigger. The sound of the shot pierces the warm evening air. The bullet travels at 3,000 feet per second. It strikes Martin in the right cheek, shatters his jaw, severs his spine, and lodges in his shoulder. Martin falls backward violently. His colleagues below scream and run for the stairs. Ralph Abernathy runs out of the room and finds Martin on the balcony floor, bleeding profusely. Martin, Martin, can you hear me? Ralph shouts, holding his best friend's head. Martin is conscious for a moment, his eyes open, but he can't speak. Blood flows from a massive wound. Someone runs to call an ambulance. Others desperately search for towels to stop the bleeding. But everyone knows in their hearts that Martin Luther King Jr. is dying. The ambulance arrives quickly and takes Martin to St. Joseph's Hospital. Doctors work frantically, but the wound is too severe. The bullet destroyed vital structures. At 7:05 p.m., 1 hour and 4 minutes after the shot, doctors declare Martin Luther King Jr. dead. He is 39 years, 2 months, and 21 days old. An extraordinary life cut short at its most productive moment. Ralph Abernathy calls Coretta. Coretta, Martin has been shot. Is he dead? She asks, her voice calm but breaking. Yes, honey, he's gone. The world Martin built begins to crumble before his body even cools. In cities across America, black people hear the news and respond with uncontrollable fury. Riots begin. Washington, Baltimore, Chicago, Kansas City burn. 110 cities explode in violence. It is the greatest wave of riots since the Civil War. James Earl Ray flees Memphis immediately after the assassination. He escapes to Canada, then to London. But 65 days after the assassination, he is captured at Heathrow Airport trying to fly to Belgium. He will be extradited, tried, and convicted. He will receive 99 years in prison. He will spend the rest of his life pleading innocence, insisting that he was part of a larger conspiracy. Many, including the King family, will come to believe that he did not act alone. But on that night of April 4th, as Martin's body lay in the morgue at St. Joseph's Hospital, the question isn't who killed him, but what they killed. Did they kill just a man, or did they kill a movement? Did they kill a dream? In the dark days that follow, as America burns and weeps, the answer remains uncertain. Martin Luther King Jr. is dead. But will his idea survive? Will his legacy endure? Or did the dream end with a bullet on a Memphis balcony? Episode 8, The Eternal Legacy. April 5th, 1968. America awakens to an altered reality. Martin Luther King Jr., the apostle of nonviolence, the prophet of justice, the dreamer of a better future, is dead. Newspapers carry enormous headlines. Dr. King assassinated. Photographs of the Lorraine Motel balcony, stained with blood, circulate around the world. But the most shocking images come from the burning American cities. President Lyndon B. Johnson appears on national television, his face marked by sadness and concern. America is horrified, but will not be intimidated by the murderers, he declares. He orders the National Guard into the streets. Federal troops patrol Washington for the first time since the Civil War. Tanks roll through the streets of the Capitol. It is a scene of war on American soil, all triggered by a bullet. Coretta Scott King, widowed at 40, must now navigate the unnavigable, raising 4 children without their father, honoring a monumental legacy, keeping a movement alive. Yolanda is 12, Martin III is 10, Dexter is 8, and Bernice is barely 5. Your father was a good man, Coretta tells him, silent tears falling. He died for what he believed in. We must continue his work. Coretta displays extraordinary fortitude. 5 days after the assassination, she leads the march Martin was planning in Memphis. Thousands walk peacefully through the streets, carrying signs that read, "I am a man," and honored Dr. King with nonviolence. It's a testament to the power of his ideas, the persistence of his philosophy even after his death. The sanitation workers eventually win their strike. Martin died for them, but his death was not in vain. April 9, 1968. Atlanta, Georgia. Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral is a massive, historic event. 150,000 people line the streets. The funeral service is held at Ebenezer Baptist Church, where Martin preached alongside his father. The church can only accommodate 800, but outside, crowds listen through loudspeakers. Dignitaries from around the world attend. Robert Kennedy, Richard Nixon, Nelson Rockefeller, Harry Belafonte, Sammy Davis Jr., Marlon Brando. But the most significant are the thousands of ordinary people. Sanitation workers in their uniforms, civil rights activists with their battle scars, elderly women who walked during the Montgomery boycott. They are Martin's true legacy. In his will, Martin requested that if there were eulogies at his funeral, they mention his attempt to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and love and serve humanity. I want us to say that day I tried to love someone. He had predicted. His prophetic words are coming true. He is remembered not as perfect, but as dedicated, not as a saint, but as a servant. June 5, 1968. Just 2 months after Martin's death, another tragedy struck America. Robert F. Kennedy, who had announced Martin's death to a black crowd in Indianapolis with words that prevented riots in that city, was assassinated in Los Angeles. Bobby had just won the California presidential primary. Many believed he would become president, that he would continue Martin's work from the White House. Their deaths plunged the nation into deeper despair. 2 giants of the social justice movement, murdered in the space of 63 days. The violence seems unstoppable, progress impossible. The optimists of the early 60s, who believed that love and reason would prevail, face an existential crisis. America seems to be falling apart, divided by race, class, generation, and war. Despite Martin's death, Ralph Abernathy and other leaders decided to continue the Poor People's Campaign. In May 1968, thousands of poor people of all races converged on Washington. They established Resurrection City on the National Mall, a tent city where they lived for 6 weeks, demanding attention to American poverty. But without Martin, the campaign lacks focus and cohesive leadership. Rain turns Resurrection City into a quagmire. Racial and political tensions divide participants. The media loses interest. The campaign ends without significant legislative achievements. It's a painful reminder. Movements depend on extraordinary leaders. Martin Luther King Jr. was irreplaceable. His death left a void that no one person could fill. But Martin achieved something in death that he had fought to achieve in life. The Fair Housing Act of 1968. Congress had blocked this legislation for 2 years, but Martin's death and the riots that followed created irresistible political pressure. On April 11, 1968, just a week after the assassination, President Johnson signed a law prohibiting discrimination in the sale or rental of housing. It's a bittersweet victory. The civil rights laws Martin fought to secure, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and now the Fair Housing Act of 1968 legally transform America. They dismantle American apartheid, opening previously closed doors. But attitudes of the heart change more slowly than words on paper. The war for souls continues. Over the years, something complicated happens to the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. He's transformed from a radical revolutionary into a sanitized and safe symbol. Schools teach about his "I Have a Dream" speech, but ignore his critiques of capitalism. They celebrate his fight against segregation, but forget his opposition to the Vietnam War. They turn him into a comfortable peacemaker instead of the uncomfortable prophet he was. This domestication of Martin's legacy frustrates those who knew him. "We all want to reclaim Dr. King now," Coretta says years later. But when he was alive, many of those who now praise him were denouncing him. The Martin celebrated on national holidays is an edited version, an image that doesn't bother, doesn't challenge, doesn't demand radical change. This is the price of becoming a national icon. Complexity is sacrifice for simplicity, truth for convenience. 1968. Coretta Scott King establishes a King Center in Atlanta to preserve Martin's legacy and continues work for nonviolence, civil rights, and economic justice. For years, she campaigned for the establishment of a national holiday in Martin's honor. She faced fierce political resistance, especially from conservatives who viewed him as a radical and a potential communist. Finally, in 1983, President Ronald Reagan signed a law establishing Martin Luther King Jr. Day as a federal holiday. It was to be celebrated on the third Monday of January, close to his birthday. It was a monumental victory, the culmination of 15 years of activism by Coretta and others. Martin Luther King Jr. became the first African American and the first non-president to be honored with a federal holiday, but some states held out until the mid-1990s. Martin Luther King Jr. famously believed that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. In the decades since his death, there is evidence of both progress and regression. The United States elected its first black president, Barack Obama, in 2008, a moment unthinkable when Martin died. Black people serve in positions of power unimaginable in 1968. But racial justice remains elusive. Police brutality against black people continues, now documented by cell phone cameras. Black people are disproportionately incarcerated. The racial wealth gap persists. Residential and educational segregation, though no longer legal, continues through economic mechanisms. The question remains, how much has really changed? Movements like Black Lives Matter, founded in 2013, remember Martin's movement but also critique it. They embrace tactical nonviolence but reject passivity. They demand justice with urgency that accepts no patience. They are heirs to Martin but also evolutions beyond him. The struggle he began continues, adapting to new contexts, new challenges, and new generations. So what is Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy? Was it successful? The answer depends on how we measure success. Legally, he achieved monumental victories. Culturally, he transformed the conversation about race in America. Morally, he raised the consciousness of a nation. But the dream he articulated, the promised land he envisioned, has yet to be fully realized. Perhaps that's the point. Martin didn't offer final solutions, but rather ongoing challenges. He didn't promise that the struggle would end, but that it was worth fighting. Freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, he taught. It must be demanded by the oppressed. His life was a ceaseless demand, a prophetic cry for justice that resonates through the decades. 56 years after his death in 2024, the name of Martin Luther King Jr. still resonates. Students read his letters in classrooms. Activists quote his speeches at protests. Politicians invoke his memory, even if they sometimes betray his principles. His image appears on postage stamps, monuments, and street names. He is omnipresent in American memory. But more important than the monuments are the ideas. Nonviolent resistance as a political strategy. The intersection of racial, economic, and peace justice. The notion that the moral arc of the universe bends toward justice, but only if courageous people push it in that direction. These ideas survive, evolve, and inspire new generations of freedom fighters around the world. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela cited Martin as an inspiration during his fight against apartheid. In Tiananmen Square, Chinese students chanted, "We shall overcome." On the streets of Hong Kong, democracy protesters quoted his words. The small-time preacher from Atlanta, who never sought to be a world leader, became exactly that, a beacon of hope for the oppressed everywhere. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream remains unfinished. It is simultaneously his failure and his promise. He failed to see the promised land in his lifetime, but he left a map for future generations. He didn't eliminate racism, but he provided tools to combat it. He didn't create the perfect society, but he articulated a vision of what it could be. "I may not get there with you," he said the night before he died. He was right. He didn't, but he pointed the way. And in the 56 years since his death, millions have continued the journey. Some steps forward, some back. Victories followed by setbacks. But the movement continues, imperfect, frustrating, but unstoppable. The beauty of Martin's legacy is that it was never about him. It was always about us, about the capacity of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, about sanitation workers demanding dignity, about students sitting at segregated counters, about elderly women walking miles rather than accept humiliation, about every person who says no more to injustice and acts on that conviction. Of all Martin's speeches, letters, and sermons, certain words remain crystal clear through the decades. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. Our life begins to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. These aren't just pretty quotes for motivational posters. They are lived principles, paid for in blood, refined in the jails of the South, tested on the streets of Birmingham and Memphis. They are hard-won truths that transcend their specific historical moment. They speak to every generation facing the choice between comfortable silence and costly witness. Coretta Scott King lived for another 38 years after Martin's death. She refused to be simply Dr. King's widow. She became a leader in her own right, an advocate for women's rights, an anti-apartheid activist, and a voice for peace. She traveled to South Africa, met with world leaders, and spoke out against injustice wherever she saw it. "I'm not his widow, I'm his wife," she liked to say. She kept his legacy alive, but also expanded it, applying its principles to new contexts. When she died in 2006, she was honored as a pioneer in her own right. She had taken the deepest pain, the loss of her murdered husband, and transformed it into purpose. Her children continued the work. The lineage of activism persists. October 16, 2011, on National Mall in Washington, D.C., the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial is dedicated. A 30-foot statue and a 100-foot granite mountain carved from a mountain of despair overlook the Jefferson Memorial. He is the first African-American and the first non-president, honored with a monument on the National Mall. The statue depicts Martin with his arms crossed, his expression determined, looking toward the horizon. It's not a peaceful and comfortable image, but a powerful and defiant one. The monument includes 14 quotes carved in granite, words that capture the essence of his message. Visitors from around the world come, touch the granite, read the words, and are inspired. It's more than stone. It's a promise in physical form. Martin Luther King Jr. posed a question every generation must answer. What are you doing for others? He didn't ask how much money you have, how successful you are, or how comfortable your life is. He asked what you sacrifice for justice, how you serve the marginalized, whether you're using your life for something greater than yourself. It's an uncomfortable question because it demands action. It isn't satisfied with good intentions or appropriate feelings. It requires real risk, real discomfort, real sacrifice. Martin practiced what he preached. He gave up security, comfort, ultimately his very life. He doesn't ask everyone to do the same thing, but he does ask everyone to do something. In every era, new injustices demand new leaders. Racism evolves, so must the strategies to combat it. Poverty persists. New solutions must be imagined. War continues. New prophets of peace must arise. Martin wasn't the Messiah. He was a role model. He showed that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they are committed to something greater than themselves. So, how does history judge Martin Luther King Jr.? As one of the great moral leaders of human civilization, comparable to Gandhi, Mandela, and the biblical prophets he so admired. As an imperfect man who achieved greatness not in spite of his struggles, but through his commitment to keep fighting. He was a pastor, activist, father, husband, leader, and dreamer. He was an intellectual who read philosophy, and a poet who moved souls with metaphors. He was a political strategist who understood power, and a moral prophet who called us to transcend it. He was very human in his flaws and very extraordinary in his accomplishments. He was, in the words he chose for his epitaph, someone who sought to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, and love and serve humanity. Today, more than half a century after his death, Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream lives on in ways he would recognize and in ways that would surprise him. It lives on every time someone stands up against injustice despite the personal cost. It lives on when communities unite across racial lines to demand change. It lives on when young students study his life and decide to dedicate theirs to service. The dream is unfinished, tainted, imperfect, but it is not dead. It cannot die because it was not just Martin's dream. It is a dream of humanity itself. The dream of a society where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin, where the children of former slaves and former slave owners sit together at the table of brotherhood, where justice flows like water and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his life for that dream. Thousands before him gave their lives. Thousands after him have done the same. And the dream endures because it is true, because it resonates with something deep in the human spirit. The longing to be free, to be treated with dignity, to live in peace. On his grave in Atlanta, the words are carved in marble. Free at last, thank God Almighty, I am free at last. They are the same words that ended his most famous speech. In death, Martin found the freedom he sought in life. But his work, our work, continues. Because the dream doesn't end with a person. It's passed down from generation to generation, evolving, adapting, but always calling us towards something better. Martin Luther King Jr. wasn't the beginning or the end. He was a crucial chapter in a story that began long before him and will continue long after. The question isn't whether the dream will survive. The question is, what will we do with it? Will we let it become empty words on holidays? Or will we live it out in our daily actions? Will we be spectators in the great struggle for justice? Or active participants? Martin Luther King Jr. left us more than memory. He left us responsibility. The dream is now ours. The mountain is now before us. And each of us must decide, will we climb to the top or will we remain in the valley? The choice, as always, is ours. And so, the echo of his voice continues to resonate throughout time. I have a dream, and that dream, imperfect and unfinished, continues to call us toward the promised land he glimpsed but never reached. It's up to us to continue the journey.